You've been trying so hard to get it right, haven't you? Not only in what you do, but in how you heal, how you grow, how you carry your heart through this world. And somewhere inside all that effort, you began to believe that peace would arrive the moment you finally became flawless. So you watched yourself closely. You corrected your reactions. You monitored your thoughts. You questioned your timing, your tone, your choices, your body, your emotions, your readiness, your worth. Even your tenderness became something to manage. Even your longing became something to improve. And that kind of living can make a soul very tired. I want to share something with you gently, because this is important to hear. You do not need perfection in order to feel close to yourself again. You do not need a spotless past, a fully healed nervous system, a disciplined morning routine, or a mind that never wavers. You do not need to become a polished version of yourself before life opens. What you may be longing for is not perfection at all. What you may be longing for is alignment. There is a difference, and your heart already knows this. Perfection is the voice that says, "Not yet, not until you've fixed this, not until you've mastered that, not until your body looks different, your emotions calm down, your fears disappear, your habits become consistent, your relationships become clean, your purpose becomes obvious." Perfection keeps moving the doorway farther away. It keeps placing your own life on the other side of some invisible exam you never seem to finish. Alignment speaks very differently. Alignment says, "Come as you are and tell the truth from here." Alignment says, "Pause for a moment and notice what is real in you now." Alignment says, "Stop shaping yourself into what earns approval and begin listening for what creates peace." Alignment does not humiliate you for being human. It does not demand performance before belonging. It meets you in the middle of your unfinished life and whispers, "Start here." And perhaps that is why this moment matters. Because you may be discovering in a way that reaches deeper than language that becoming better and becoming truer are not always the same thing. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed how easy it is to spend years trying to optimize your life while quietly drifting farther from your own center? Have you noticed how self-improvement can become another costume for self-rejection when the energy underneath it is fear? You are not imagining this. So many people are living with a hidden tension they can barely name. They are functioning. They are showing up. They are reading, learning, meditating, processing, achieving, seeking. They are doing all the right things on the outside. And inside, something still feels tight. Something still feels like it is bracing. Something still feels like it is waiting for permission to rest. That waiting has a cost. It shows up in the way you second-guess your own inner knowing. It shows up in the way you hesitate before speaking honestly. It shows up in the way you override your body when it asks for slowness. It shows up in the way you stay in conversations too long, explain yourself too much, apologize for your needs too quickly, and treat your sensitivity as a flaw to manage instead of a wisdom to trust. And yes, I said wisdom. Because what you have called overthinking may sometimes be the ache of misalignment. What you have called laziness may sometimes be the exhaustion of carrying a life that no longer fits. What you have called confusion may sometimes be the natural fog that appears when one part of you is still trying to please an old world while another part of you is quietly turning toward truth. Let that settle for a moment. You have likely been taught, in ways both obvious and subtle, that the good life belongs to the person who performs it well. The person who is organized, composed, efficient, emotionally regulated, consistently grateful, spiritually evolved, relationally skillful, financially stable, physically radiant, and endlessly resilient. The person who somehow carries all of life's complexity without ever dropping the ball. The person who can turn every wound into wisdom on schedule. The person who never backslides. The person who glows without effort. But you are not here to become a machine made of inspiration. You are here to become honest. And honesty is softer than perfection, though it asks for more courage. Perfection can hide. Perfection can imitate. Perfection can perform calm while panic lives in the chest. Perfection can say the right words while the body quietly disappears. Perfection can build a beautiful image around an abandoned self. Alignment cannot do that. Alignment asks for contact. Alignment asks for presence. Alignment asks you to feel when something is off, even if the offness is inconvenient. Alignment asks you to stop betraying what you know in the name of being admirable. This is why alignment can feel both relieving and unset. Cling at first. It is relieving because your nervous system recognizes truth when it arrives. Something in you exhales. Something in you unclenches. Something in you stops trying to win an argument with reality. And it can feel unsettling because once you feel what is true, it becomes harder to continue living as if you do not. You may already know this sensation. You walk into a room and your body tightens before your mind has gathered a reason. You say yes to something and feel heaviness settle into your stomach. You keep a commitment and feel your life force drain a little more each week. You stay loyal to an image of who you have been, while your inner world keeps whispering, this no longer fits. You tell yourself to be grateful, to be mature, to be reasonable, to be patient. And underneath all that instruction is a quieter knowing that you are not in rhythm with yourself. That rhythm matters because life is not asking you to become a perfect object. Life is asking you to become a living relationship with your own truth. And relationships require listening. They require adjustment. They require moments of return. They require humility. They require love that is not based on achievement. Perhaps you have been waiting to love yourself after you finally become someone easier to love. I know how tender that is. I know how many people carry that private bargain inside. They tell themselves they are doing the work, when much of what they are really doing is negotiating with their own worth. They are trying to earn gentleness, earn rest, earn visibility, earn joy, earn the right to trust themselves. And when they inevitably remain human, they feel they have failed. But your worth does not improve through punishment. Your worth does not become more valid because you criticize yourself into better habits. Your worth does not deepen when you override your body or silence your sadness or keep smiling while your spirit is weary. Your worth is not a prize for excellent self-management. It is the soil you stand on. It is the ground beneath every mistake, every lesson, every beginning, every return. This is where we begin to separate perfection from alignment in a way that can transform everything. Perfection is image-based. Alignment is relationship-based. Perfection asks, how do I appear? Alignment asks, how do I feel in my own being? Perfection asks, how do I avoid mistakes? Alignment asks, what is true now? Perfection asks, how do I stay in control? Alignment asks, what wants to be honored? Perfection asks, what will they think? Alignment asks, what does my heart already know? Perfection is rigid because it is built on fear. Alignment is alive because it responds to the living moment. Can you feel the difference already? One path contracts, the other path opens. One path performs, the other path listens. One path punishes inconsistency. The other path makes room for humanity. One path sees your mess as evidence against you. The other path sees your mess as information. And information is sacred when received with compassion. If you've been feeling exhausted by your own inner standards, it may be because your soul is no longer willing to use pressure as a path. If you've been craving softness in a way that feels almost urgent, it may be because some deeper wisdom is trying to teach you that force cannot carry you where love is meant to lead. If you've been unable to tolerate things you used to endure, it may be because your system is becoming more honest, not more difficult. That is not regression. That is awakening. There is a kind of awakening that looks dramatic from the outside, all insight and revelation and sudden change. And then there is the quieter kind, the one that arrives as intolerance for self-abandonment, the one that says, I cannot keep smiling my way through what hurts. I cannot keep calling it discipline when it is really fear. I cannot keep calling it maturity when it is really emotional disappearance. I cannot keep shaping myself around what is expected while telling myself I am fine. This quieter awakening changes lives from the inside out. Because once you begin to notice the small daily moments where you leave yourself, you begin to understand that alignment is not a grand abstract concept. It is intimate. It is practical. It is present. It lives in the tone you use with yourself when you make a mistake. It lives in whether your yes is really a yes, It lives in whether you make room for grief instead of trying to be impressive through it. It lives in whether you tell the truth about what drains you, what nourishes you, what no longer belongs, what you deeply need. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You do not have to understand every layer of your pattern. You do not have to map the next 10 years with spiritual precision. Often, the return begins with one honest moment, one uncluttered admission, one breath in which you stop arguing with what you feel. Maybe that sounds too simple, but simplicity is not the same as ease. Sometimes the simplest truth is the one the defended self avoids most fiercely. For example, you may know very clearly that you are tired beyond what sleep can fix. You may know that certain relationships keep asking you to shrink in order to stay connected. You may know that your calendar is full of things that once mattered and no longer do. You may know that your body has been speaking in whispers you keep translating into inconvenience. You may know that the version of success you inherited has stopped making sense for the life inside you now. And perhaps you keep waiting until you can explain all of that perfectly before you honor it. That is perfection wearing wise clothes. Alignment does not need a dissertation. Alignment needs honesty. Alignment needs enough stillness for you to hear the difference between anxiety and intuition, between guilt and love, between old conditioning and present truth. That listening takes patience. It takes practice. It takes tenderness. It also takes permission to get it wrong sometimes while learning the language of your own inner world. Because yes, there will be moments when you mistake fear for truth. There will be days when you overcorrect. There will be choices you revisit. There will be lessons that take longer to settle than you hoped. And none of that means you are failing. It means you are in relationship with a living life, and living things move, adapt, falter, breathe, and begin again. Think of the way dawn arrives. It does not demand that the night apologize before morning can begin. It does not shame darkness for existing. Light does not punish the sky for having been shadowed. It comes gradually, faithfully, and with perfect timing of its own. That is how many inner shifts happen too, not through violent self-correction, but through gentle increasing contact with what is already true. Something in you recognizes this. You have likely had moments, perhaps very small ones, where alignment found you before you had words for it. A conversation where you told the truth and felt your whole body relax. A walk where your thoughts finally grew quiet enough for one clear knowing to rise. A decision that made no sense on paper and yet left you with an unmistakable steadiness. A season when you stopped performing strength and discovered a deeper kind of strength underneath. A day when you let yourself rest before you had earned it, and instead of falling apart, you felt more like yourself. These moments matter because they reveal a law of the inner life that many people overlook. Peace is not always found by controlling more. Often it is found by ending the argument between your inner knowing and your outer behavior. That ending is alignment. And from here, we can go deeper. Because perfection is not only a habit of thought, it is often a survival strategy. It forms early in many lives, quietly, convincingly, and with great intelligence. It may have begun when love felt safer if you were easy. It may have begun when approval was more available than attunement. It may have begun in homes where emotions were inconvenient, or where achievement became the currency of belonging, or where unpredictability taught you to stay vigilant. It may have begun when you learned that mistakes carried too much weight, that being needed felt safer than having needs, that being exceptional protected you from being dismissed. So of course a part of you learned to refine yourself. Of course a part of you became highly observant, highly responsible, highly self-aware, highly committed to not causing problems. Of course a part of you decided that if you could become good enough, prepared enough, kind enough, useful enough, beautiful enough, spiritual enough, then perhaps life would finally soften. That part deserves compassion. It is easy to make perfectionism the villain. But what if we met it more honestly? What if we saw that perfectionism is often a frightened part of the self, trying to create safety through control? What if we understood that it is not your enemy, even when it exhausts you? What if we recognize that harsh inner standards are often rooted in old fear, not present truth? When you begin to see that, something changes. Instead of attacking you or self for being hard on yourself, you become curious. Instead of layering shame on top of pressure, you begin to ask, what is this pressure trying to protect me from? Instead of forcing yourself to let go all at once, you start building trust with the parts of you that still believe control is necessary. This is a gentler path. And yes, it is a stronger one too. Because alignment is not the collapse of standards. It is not drifting through life without care. It is not indifference, passivity, or spiritual bypass. Alignment can be deeply discerning. Alignment can hold boundaries. Alignment can make courageous decisions. Alignment can choose excellence. But the energy beneath it is different. It is not trying to prove worth. It is trying to honor truth. That changes the felt experience of everything. You can clean your home from perfection and feel strain in every movement. Or you can clean your home from alignment and feel care moving through your hands. You can pursue a goal from perfection and feel every step laced with fear of inadequacy. Or you can pursue a goal from alignment and feel devotion, curiosity, and life moving with you. You can speak kindly because you are trying to be good, or you can speak kindly because kindness reflects who you are when you are not in defense. One may look similar from the outside. Your body knows the difference, and your body is a wise messenger here. Have you noticed how your body responds when you are performing? The jaw tightens, the chest narrows, the breath rises, the shoulders brace, the stomach pulls in. The face arranges itself. Even silence becomes effort. There is a subtle holding, as though some part of you is standing guard. Now notice what happens when something feels aligned. Not perfect, aligned. Perhaps the breath deepens. Perhaps your organs seem to settle. Perhaps your voice becomes simpler. Perhaps your mind stops scrambling for justification. Perhaps there is room inside you again. That room matters. Because without inner room, it is very difficult to hear yourself clearly. When the nervous system is crowded by pressure, truth gets buried under strategy. You start making decisions from what will reduce discomfort fastest, not from what reflects your deepest knowing. You start mistaking urgency for clarity. You start believing that if you can just solve one more thing, fix one more flaw, organize one more area of your life, then peace will finally arrive. But peace does not like to be chased in that way. Peace tends to arrive when you stop treating yourself as a problem to be solved. Let that land fully. You are not a problem to be solved. You are not a project that has gone off track. You are not a spiritual assignment awaiting completion. You are a living being, learning how to stay in relationship with yourself while life keeps changing. That is very different. And because it is different, it asks different questions. Not, how do I become impossible to criticize? But what helps me stay honest? Not, how do I get everything right? But what creates inner coherence? Not, how do I stop feeling messy? But what happens when I stop making messiness mean I am unworthy? Not, how do I become perfect enough to trust? But what if trust begins when I stop abandoning myself in the moments I feel imperfect? That last question can change a life. Because many people imagine self-trust as something earned after enough consistency. They imagine that one day, after enough healing, enough discipline, enough self-control, enough evidence, they will be granted the right to rely on themselves. But self-trust often begins much earlier and much more quietly than that. It begins the moment you keep yourself company in a hard moment instead of turning against yourself. It begins the moment you tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. It begins the moment you stop using your humanity as proof that you cannot be trusted. You've been carrying this for a long time, haven't you? The belief that your mistakes disqualify you from your own love. The belief that your inconsistency means you cannot be relied upon. The belief that if you were really growing, really awakening, really healing, you would be more composed than this by now. And maybe you're tired of that belief. Maybe your spirit is tired of it. Maybe your body is tired of organizing itself around it. Maybe that is why these words are finding you now. Because there comes a point in many healing journeys when information is no longer the missing piece. You already know a great deal. You have read the books. You have listened to the teachings. You have become fluent in the language of growth. And still there may be an ache in you, because knowledge cannot replace congruence. Insight cannot replace embodiment. Understanding cannot replace the quiet, sacred act of choosing not to leave yourself. This is where alignment becomes not just a concept, but a daily devotion. And devotion is a beautiful word here because it softens the harshness of self-improvement into something more reverent. Devotion is not obsessed with image. Devotion returns. Devotion listens. Devotion tends. Devotion notices when something has drifted and gently brings it back. Devotion does not scream when you stumble. It places a hand on your shoulder and says, "Come back, dear one. Come back to what is true. Come back to this moment. Come back to the body. Come back to the breath. Come back to the life that is actually here." Can you feel how different that is from pressure? Pressure says, faster. Devotion says, stay with it. Pressure says, do better. Devotion says, be here. Pressure says, why are you still like this? Devotion says, what is asking for love right now? Pressure says, fix it immediately. Devotion says, listen more deeply. There is so much healing in that shift alone. And sometimes the deepest shifts do not begin with dramatic choices. They begin with naming what is true in ordinary moments. I am tired. I do not want this. I do want that. I am sad. I am scared. I feel pulled towards something I cannot fully explain. This room feels heavy. This conversation feels wrong. This pace is hurting me. This dream still matters. This relationship needs honesty. My body is asking for gentleness. My soul is asking for space. Those sentences may seem small. They are not small. They are bridges back to yourself. I once knew someone who spent years trying to make herself into the kind of person who could carry everything beautifully. She was capable, admired, dependable, and endlessly available. People trusted her. They praised her. They told her how strong she was. And secretly, she felt farther and farther from herself. One evening, after a long day of meeting everyone else's expectations, she sat alone in her car and realized she did not know what she actually wanted anymore. Not in some grand spiritual sense, just in the simplest human sense. She had become so fluent in anticipating the needs of the world around her that she had lost touch with the life moving inside her own chest. That night did not solve everything, but it marked a turning point. Because she stopped asking, "How can I keep doing this well?" and began asking, "What is true for me now?" That question changed the shape of her life. It may change yours too. What is true for you now? Not 6 months ago. Not in the identity you outgrew. Not in the role you learned to play. Not in the fantasy of who you think you should be. Now, that question requires presence, and presence can feel vulnerable when you have lived by performance. Presence does not let you hide as easily. It does not let you use busyness as your main form of self-definition. It does not let you call misalignment normal forever. Presence brings things into view. And once they are in view, you begin to understand that some of what you have called stability was actually numbness. Some of what you called discipline was fear. Some of what you called loyalty was self-erasure. Some of what you called patience was postponed truth. This is not a condemnation. It is an unveiling. And unveilings can be tender. So if something in you feels emotional right now, that makes sense. If something in you feels resistant, that makes sense too. We do not always welcome truth the first moment it arrives, especially when truth asks us to loosen identities that once kept us safe. Especially when truth threatens old bargains that helped us survive. Especially when truth suggests that the life we have built may need to be rearranged in order for us to breathe more freely. Still, what is true tends to wait with remarkable patience. It waits in the body. It waits in recurring exhaustion. It waits in the ache that returns after every achievement. It waits in the quiet envy you feel when someone else lives more honestly. It waits in the relief that floods you when you imagine choosing differently. It waits in the tears that come for no obvious reason. It waits because your soul is not in a hurry to humiliate you. It is simply inviting you home. And home, in this sense, is not a place you earn. It is a place you remember. Somewhere deep inside, you've always known this. You've always known when something was off, even if you talked yourself out of it. You've always known when your smile cost too much. You've always known when your yes was a betrayal. You've always known when rest was needed, when grief needed space, when a path had ended, when a desire was alive, when a relationship asked too much of your shape. The knowing was there. What often went missing was permission. So let this be permission. Permission to stop measuring the sacredness of your life by how polished it appears. Permission to stop calling yourself behind because your journey has texture. Permission to release timelines that turn tenderness into failure. Permission to want what is clean and true, even if it looks less impressive from the outside. Permission to admit that you are tired of pretending your pressure is purpose. Permission to choose alignment over image, even when others do not understand the change. This is not selfish. It is sane. And it is especially important in a world that rewards appearance so aggressively. We live in systems that often praise output over presence, manageability over authenticity, speed over integrity, performance over embodiment. In such a world, alignment can look radical. It can look like saying no without a dramatic explanation. It can look like moving more slowly, even when the culture worships urgency. It can look like refusing opportunities that do not feel clean. It can look like protecting your mornings. It can look like changing your mind. It can look like not proving how much you can endure. That last one is powerful. You do not have to prove your goodness through endurance. You do not have to prove your maturity through overfunctioning. You do not have to prove your spirituality through endless tolerance. You do not have to prove your worth through depletion. Perhaps you've been taught, in ways spoken or unspoken, that a good person is one who can carry immense weight quietly. A person who adapts. A person who does not ask for too much. A person who keeps harmony at any cost. A person who can tolerate misalignment. without complaint. But tolerance is not always wisdom. Sometimes tolerance is what happens when the self has been trained to disappear. Alignment calls the self back into the room, and once the self returns, many things become clearer. You begin to notice that some conversations leave you foggy, while others leave you whole. You begin to notice that certain goals energize you, while others only flatter your image. You begin to notice that the body softens around truth and hardens around pretense. You begin to notice that your deepest exhaustion is not from effort itself, but from effort disconnected from meaning. You begin to notice that not everything admirable is aligned, and not everything aligned will be admired. That can be a hard truth to accept, because many people are trying to be seen as good, wise, kind, successful, healed, evolved. Very few are willing to ask, does this actually feel like my life? Very few are willing to let their choices be guided by resonance instead of applause. Very few are willing to look simple or slow or inconvenient in the service of inner coherence. But perhaps you are becoming one of those people. Perhaps that is why what once worked no longer does. Perhaps that is why certain masks feel unbearably heavy now. Perhaps that is why you cannot force enthusiasm for what no longer belongs. Perhaps that is why your body has become less compliant with your old strategies. Perhaps that is why perfection has started to feel like a cage instead of a goal. If that is true, then you are not lost. You are in transition, and transitions have their own weather. They are rarely neat. They are rarely linear. They often involve periods where the old identity loosens before the new one feels stable. They involve confusion, tenderness, and a strange suspension where you are no longer willing to live as before, but not yet fully certain how to live otherwise. This is one reason so many people reach for perfection during transition. Perfection promises certainty. It says, if you can just figure it out fast enough, you can avoid the discomfort of the in-between. But the in-between is not a mistake. The in-between is often where alignment gets refined. Like a seed breaking open in dark soil, some of your most meaningful growth may happen where clarity has not yet become visible. The breaking is not failure. The darkness is not punishment. The hiddenness is not evidence that nothing is happening. Something is reorganizing. Something is shedding its old architecture. Something is learning a different way to belong to itself. And that reorganization asks for tremendous compassion. Not indulgence, not avoidance, compassion. The kind that tells the truth without violence. The kind that can say, yes, this is not working, and I do not need to shame myself for seeing it. The kind that can say, yes, I have patterns that hurt me, and I can meet them with steadiness instead of disgust. The kind that can say, yes, I want more for my life, and wanting more does not mean I am ungrateful for what has been. Compassion is not weak. It is structurally intelligent. It helps the system feel safe enough to change. That matters because frightened systems do not transform well under attack. They defend, they contract, they hide, they comply outwardly and rebel inwardly. Many people know this pattern. They make strict promises to themselves. They try to impose a better life through force. They hold for a while, then collapse into shame when the deeper issues remain untouched. Not because they are weak, because force rarely creates lasting intimacy with the self. Alignment does, because alignment works with truth instead of against it. It asks, what is the kindest accurate response to what is here? Not the softest, not the most convenient. The kindest accurate response. That phrase may help you in many seasons. When you are exhausted, the kindest accurate response may be rest. When you are resentful, the kindest accurate response may be a boundary. When you are grieving, the kindest accurate response may be to stop performing normal. When you are numb, the kindest accurate response may be gentleness rather than more stimulation. When you are lit up by a quiet desire, the kindest accurate response may be to take one small step toward it instead of dismissing it as impractical. When you are holding on to something dead, the kindest accurate response may be release. Can you see how alive that is? Can you see how different that is from perfection's fixed script? Perfection comes with predetermined answers. Work harder, be better, tighten up, try again, do more, feel less, stay appealing, keep producing, hide the mess, minimize the need, earn the rest, explain the limit, control the outcome. Alignment listens before it moves. This is why alignment can look different from one day to the next. One day it may invite courage. Another day it may invite stillness. One season it may ask for disciplined devotion. Another season it may ask for radical simplification. One relationship may call forth fierce honesty. Another may ask for tenderness and patience. Alignment is not a brand identity. It is a living conversation with reality. And because it is living, it requires trust. Trust grows slowly. It grows through repeated acts of self-return. It grows when you notice a truth and do not dismiss it. It grows when you say no and survive the guilt. It grows when you rest and discover the world does not end. It grows when you speak honestly and realize your voice can hold you. It grows when you stop making every emotional wave into a character flaw. It grows when you stop demanding that the body behave like a machine and begin honoring it as a messenger. Your body already recognizes this truth. Notice your shoulders as you hear that. Notice your jaw. Notice the breath moving through your chest. You do not need to force anything right now. You do not need to perform receiving. Simply notice whether some part of you is softening around the possibility that alignment could be enough. That you could stop chasing the fantasy of a flawless self and begin relating to the real one with reverence. There is so much freedom there. Freedom to be in process without making process an identity. Freedom to care deeply without collapsing into control. Freedom to choose growth without turning growth into punishment. Freedom to make amends without making yourself irredeemable. Freedom to desire more without despising where you are. Freedom to become honest without becoming harsh. This kind of freedom changes relationships too. Because when you stop trying to be perfect, you stop asking others to confirm your perfection. You stop organizing connection around image management. You stop seeking only the kinds of relationships that let you stay impressive. You become more available to intimacy because intimacy does not require flawlessness. It requires reality. It requires the willingness to be seen without excessive editing. It requires the courage to let another person meet your truth rather than your performance. That can feel scary, especially if you learned early that visibility was risky. But what if the relationships meant for your life now are not asking for your perfection? What if they are asking for your presence? What if the love that can actually nourish you is the kind that meets you where you are rather than where you pretend to be? And yes, that may mean certain relationships shift. Not every bond survives your alignment. Not every system welcomes your truth. Not every role remains intact when you stop over-functioning. Sometimes the very people who benefited from your perfection become uncomfortable when you begin to live more honestly. Sometimes they call it selfishness. Sometimes they call it change. Sometimes they do not know what to call it because they have only known the version of you that could be counted on to disappear. That is painful. And it is real. This has not been an easy journey for you. Learning where love ends and self-erasure begins. Learning where service ends and depletion begins. Learning where peace ends and suppression begins. So many hearts are walking through this exact threshold, feeling the ache of old roles loosening and the fear of not yet knowing what comes next. And yet here you are, still listening, still willing to tell the truth, still open enough to let something deeper guide you. That takes courage, more than you may realize. Sometimes alignment asks you to disappoint an image in order to honor a soul. That is one of the hardest lessons for people who have long been admired for their reliability. But admiration is not always intimacy, and usefulness is not the same as aliveness. You can be cherished for what you provide and still be profoundly unseen. You can be praised for your steadiness and still be starving for reciprocity. You can be needed and still be lonely. Alignment begins to reveal these distinctions, not to make you bitter, but to make you free. Freedom often begins with honest inventory. Where am I saying yes while my body says no? Where am I using achievement to avoid emptiness? Where am I calling fear discernment? Where am I calling control devotion? Where am I staying loyal to identities that drain me? Where am I making my worth dependent on how well I hold everything together? Where am I postponing joy until I deserve it? Where am I performing peace instead of inhabiting it? These are not accusations. They are lanterns. And lanterns are precious when you are moving through an inner forest. There is something happening in many lives right now that is not talked about enough. A kind of spiritual fatigue born not from lack of commitment, but from distorted commitment. People are exhausted because they have turned their own becoming into a relentless assignment. They are trying to heal correctly, grieve correctly, manifest correctly, regulate correctly, communicate correctly, parent correctly, partner correctly, awaken correctly. Even their rest becomes another thing to optimize. Even their rituals become another arena for comparison. Even their self-awareness becomes one more place to feel behind. Remember what I mentioned about the difference between becoming better and becoming truer? Here is the piece that changes everything. If the energy underneath your growth is self-rejection, then no amount of progress will feel like peace. You may achieve more. You may understand more. You may even behave more skillfully. But deep inside, the one who is doing all that work will still feel unchosen. That is why alignment matters so much. It changes the one who is walking the path, not just the path itself. When the one walking the path feels respected, things soften. When the one walking the path feels safe to be human, learning deepens. When the one walking the path is not under constant attack, resilience becomes available. When the one walking the path is allowed to rest, creativity returns. When the one walking the path knows they are loved even in incompletion, life becomes less like a test and more like a relationship. And relationships thrive on repair, not perfection. This is such a healing truth. In healthy relationships, rupture does not automatically mean the end. Misunderstanding does not automatically mean failure. Mistakes do not automatically remove love. There is room for recognition, apology, adjustment, and return. What if you offered your inner life that same dignity? What if instead of collapsing every misstep into proof that you are not growing, you practiced repair? What if you said, I see that I left myself there. I see that I pushed too hard. I see that I ignored my truth. Let me come back. Let me listen again. Let me repair the bond with my own being. That is alignment in action, not never straying, returning, not never losing the thread, finding it again, not never speaking harshly to yourself, interrupting the old tone and beginning again, not never abandoning your needs, noticing sooner, correcting with tenderness, and rebuilding trust. The gift of alignment is not that it makes you perfect. It makes you reachable by your own love. And that is a powerful thing, because once you become reachable by your own love, you do not panic as much when life gets messy. You may still grieve, you may still wobble, you may still fear, but you are less likely to turn the full force of your pain against yourself. You understand that being overwhelmed is not a moral failure. You understand that needing help is not regression. You understand that confusion can coexist with wisdom. You understand that pauses are not proof of weakness. You understand that your value remains intact while your clarity catches up. What if I told you that much of what you call perfection is actually a refusal to be in relationship with timing? Perfection wants immediate resolution. It wants certainty on demand. It wants transformation without seasons. It wants answers before readiness, outcomes before surrender, blooming without roots. But the inner life moves in cycles. There are winters of stillness, springs of possibility, summers of expansion, autumns of letting go. Each has intelligence. Each asks different things of you. Alignment honors the season. Perfection argues with it. Have you been arguing with your season? Have you been demanding bloom from a part of your life that is trying to rest? Have you been demanding certainty from a threshold that is meant to deepen your trust? Have you been demanding speed from a healing that needs slowness? Have you been demanding lightness from a grief that deserves time? Have you been demanding consistency from a nervous system that has not yet felt safe enough to unclench? If so, let there be mercy here. Mercy is not resignation. Mercy is the refusal to treat your tenderness as a defect. Mercy is what allows truth to enter without violence. Mercy is what lets you stay in contact with yourself even when the road feels unclear. Mercy says, I will not add cruelty to what is already hard. Mercy says, I can honor this season without making it my identity forever. Mercy says, I trust that something meaningful can happen here, even if I cannot yet see the full shape. Perhaps this is why so many people feel moved to tears when they are deeply understood. Not because they are weak, because being met without demand is rare. Many have known love with conditions, support with expectations, approval with strings, belonging that depends on performance. So when true gentleness arrives, the body responds. It says, finally. Finally, I do not have to earn this moment. Finally, I do not have to be impressive to be held. You deserve to meet yourself that way. Not once in a while, not only after success. Regularly, this could look very simple. It could look like pausing before you answer and noticing whether the answer is true. It could look like letting yourself say, I need time. It could look like sleeping earlier instead of proving how much you can push through. It could look like keeping one promise to yourself and valuing it more than 10 promises that only sustain your image. It could look like not abandoning a creative desire because it lacks obvious productivity. It could look like leaving room in your day for silence, for breath, for nothing performative at all. These things seem small in a culture that worships visible achievement. They are not small. They are how alignment gets woven into the texture of a life. And once alignment enters the texture of a life, the life begins to change from the inside outward, not always dramatically at first, not always in ways others notice, but certainly you become less available for what hollows you out. You become more honest about what restores you. You become less seduced by urgency. You become more responsive to peace. You become less interested in being everything to everyone. You become more interested in being present where you truly belong. You become less willing to betray your body for approval. You become more willing to disappoint an expectation in order to protect your soul. That is not hardening. That is integration. Integration is another word worth lingering with, because many people collect insight without integrating it. They know themselves conceptually, but their daily lives still run on old loyalties. They can articulate their wounds beautifully, but they still override their limits. They understand boundaries intellectually, but freeze when it is time to set one. They speak of self-worth, but remain devoted to proving it. This is not hypocrisy. It is what happens when understanding has not yet fully entered behavior. Alignment helps insight descend. It brings wisdom from the mind into the mouth, into the schedule, into the finances, into the body, into the room, into the kinds of love you accept, into the pace at which you move, into the quality of your no, into the softness of your yes, into the way you begin a morning, into the way you end a day. And here is something beautiful. Every time you choose alignment in one small way, you teach your system that truth is survivable. That matters so much. Because many misaligned lives are built on an old belief that truth is dangerous, that saying no will cost too much, that slowing down will make everything collapse, that resting will reveal inadequacy, that changing will disappoint the people you need, that honesty will bring loss you cannot bear. Sometimes those fears were shaped by real experiences. We honor that. And still, there comes a moment when the cost of staying misaligned becomes heavier than the fear of change. Perhaps you are near that moment now. Not because everything is falling apart. Sometimes it is subtler than that. Sometimes it is simply that your spirit is no longer willing to trade vitality for approval. Sometimes it is that your body keeps saying enough. Sometimes it is that the old rewards no longer soothe you. Sometimes it is that the very things you once worked so hard to secure now feel strangely empty. Sometimes it is that one quiet, honest breath feels more nourishing than all the performing you used to call success. That is sacred information. Treat it kindly. You do not have to rush because you finally see. Awareness itself is a threshold. Let the seeing work on you. Let the truth become familiar in your body. Let your choices reorganize gradually if they need to. Let yourself be a human being, learning a new way to belong to yourself. And while you are learning, it may help to remember this: alignment rarely shouts. It often arrives as steadiness, not excitement. It often feels clean rather than dramatic. It often feels like relief before it feels like certainty. Perfection loves intensity because intensity can feel like proof. Alignment often comes more quietly. It says, "This is simple. This is honest. This lets me breathe. This does not require me to fragment in order to proceed." That is why some aligned decisions can seem unimpressive from the outside, yet they carry immense power. Going to bed earlier, ending the conversation sooner, choosing the smaller, truer opportunity, telling someone you need time, taking one day off without justification, eating when your body is hungry, saying, "This matters to me," admitting, "I cannot keep doing this," walking away from what flatters you but depletes you, starting before you feel polished, beginning again without drama. These are not small acts. They are acts of congruence, and congruence restores dignity. You are not here to become a perfect performance of wellness, wisdom, or strength. You are here to become whole enough inside yourself that your life no longer has to be held together by constant self-correction. You are here to build an inner atmosphere where truth can breathe. You are here to let your outer choices gradually match your inner knowing. You are here to discover that peace grows wherever self-abandonment ends. Self-abandonment can be very subtle, so let us name a few of its quiet forms. It is the laugh that comes when you are actually hurt. It is the immediate yes that arrives before you have checked in with yourself. It is the habit of translating your needs into inconvenience. It is the way you keep pushing after your body has already asked you to stop. It is how you minimize what matters because it feels too vulnerable to claim. It is the apology you offer for taking up emotional space. It is the loyalty you maintain to who you used to be because changing would unsettle other people. It is the way you keep calling intuition overreaction because truth would require a decision. If any of these feel familiar, please be gentle. Recognition is not a reason for shame. Recognition is the beginning of return. And return can happen now in the smallest way. A fuller breath, a hand on the chest, a moment of silence before the next decision, a willingness to let this moment be exactly what it is without adding a story of deficiency. Your heart already knows this. Your body already knows this. Your life may already be trying to teach this to you. The question is not whether truth is present. The question is whether you are willing to stop demanding perfection before you honor it. There may be a part of you asking, but what about excellence? What about commitment? What about growth? What about becoming all I am meant to become? These are beautiful questions. Alignment does not oppose them. In fact, alignment may be the only thing that allows them to unfold sustainably. Because excellence rooted in fear becomes brittle. Commitment rooted in self-rejection becomes exhausting. Growth rooted in comparison becomes hollow. Becoming rooted in image becomes alienating. But excellence rooted in alignment becomes devotion. Commitment rooted in alignment becomes integrity. Growth rooted in alignment becomes organic. Becoming rooted in alignment becomes revelation. Revelation is a lovely word for this path because you are not manufacturing a self from scratch. You are uncovering what has been waiting beneath the pressure. You are revealing the life that becomes possible when you stop organizing around inadequacy. You are revealing the tenderness beneath the armor, the wisdom beneath the noise, the desire beneath the duty, the stillness beneath the strategy. And what gets revealed may surprise you. You may discover that you do not want as much as you thought you did, or that you want more than you ever let yourself admit. You may discover that peace matters more to you than admiration, or that creativity matters more than certainty. You may discover that your soul loves quiet more than excitement, or that your heart is ready for a kind of love that cannot survive your self-betrayal. You may discover that the person you are becoming is simpler than the one you tried so hard to perfect. Simpler does not mean smaller. Often it means truer. Either does not become powerful by trying to be everything at once. It becomes powerful by following its course, by honoring gravity, by moving with its own nature, by not apologizing for the shape of its flow. You, too, become powerful, not by mastering every possible version of yourself, but by following what is true with enough steadiness that your life begins to reflect it. This may be the deeper invitation beneath these words, not to become less devoted, but to become differently devoted. Not devoted to image, but to integrity. Not devoted to relentless refinement, but to honest relationship. Not devoted to proving, but to presence. Not devoted to performing peace, but to practicing return. Practicing return. That phrase may stay with you because you will forget sometimes. You will overcommit. You will speak harshly inwardly. You will reach for old strategies under stress. You will try to earn what was never withheld. You will want certainty when life offers only the next true step. This does not mean the path is lost. It means practice is alive. When you notice, return. When you tighten, soften. When you drift, listen. When you perform, pause. When you abandon yourself, come back. When you believe you must be perfect to proceed, remember, alignment is enough for this moment. That is the phrase I want to place gently in your hands. Alignment is enough for this moment. Not forever. Not for the entire rest of your life. For this moment. Because perfection overwhelms by making everything total. Alignment steadies by making truth immediate. What is aligned now? What is honest now? What would reduce fragmentation now? What would feel clean now? What would honor the body now? What would let the heart stay open now? This is how whole lives are changed. Not usually through one spectacular decision, though sometimes that happens. More often through repeated moments of choosing coherence over image, truth over performance, reverence over pressure. And because love has often been confused with effort, It may help to look at the places where perfection hides most convincingly. It does not always arrive wearing obvious harshness. Sometimes it comes dressed as responsibility, sometimes as ambition, sometimes as devotion, sometimes as high standards, sometimes as spiritual sincerity, sometimes as the wish to be a good partner, a good parent, a good friend, a good leader, a good healer, a good human being. None of those desires are wrong. They become heavy only when your humanity is no longer allowed to travel with them. Take your work, for example. Work can be an expression of purpose, creativity, contribution, stewardship, and care. It can also become an altar where you keep trying to prove your right to exist. Many people know what it is to bring not only skill to their work, but their entire self-worth. They rise in the morning already braced. They measure their day by how productive they were, how efficient, how flawless, how needed. A small mistake can darken the whole inner sky. A pause can feel dangerous. Rest can feel suspicious. Pleasure can feel undeserved until everything is complete, and everything is never complete. That is not a peaceful way to build. If you have been living that way, please know there is nothing silly about how hard it is to stop. Entire identities are often wrapped around competence. Entire family systems may have rewarded you for being the one who could handle things. Entire cultures may have trained you to believe that visible usefulness is the safest path to belonging. So when alignment invites a new relationship with work, it may feel less like a gentle pivot and more like an internal earthquake. Still, the invitation remains, not to care less, to care from a different center. Imagine the difference between working from fear and working from alignment. When fear leads, the body narrows. Every task carries the pressure of self-definition. Delays become accusations. Criticism becomes devastation. You are never simply doing the work. You are auditioning for worth through the work. But when alignment leads, contribution can become cleaner. There is still effort. There may still be excellence. There may still be discipline. But you are no longer using labor to settle the question of whether you belong here. You are bringing your gifts because they are yours to bring, not because their performance is the only thing keeping love available. How different would your days feel if work were a place of expression rather than proof? How different would your body feel at the end of the day? How different would your relationships feel if you did not arrive home already emptied by the strain of being impeccable? How different might your creativity feel if you were allowed to make, attempt, revise, and learn without turning every imperfection into a verdict on your identity? Creativity especially suffers under perfection. Creativity needs room to be awkward before it becomes clear. It needs drafts. It needs experiments. It needs wrong turns that later reveal themselves as portals. Perfection cannot tolerate that well. Perfection wants the finished masterpiece before the first messy beginning. It wants certainty before expression. It wants applause before vulnerability. And so many beautiful things remain unborn because someone is still waiting to make them flawlessly. Perhaps that someone has sometimes been you. Perhaps there is a voice, a vision, a project, a way of speaking, a way of serving, a way of creating that has lived inside you for years, and you keep postponing it until you can do it perfectly. What if that postponement is not wisdom, but fear wearing elegance? What if the life inside that creation does not need your perfection nearly as much as it needs your participation? What if the truest things you are here to offer can only be discovered through relationship with the imperfect process of bringing them forth? This is true in art. It is true in writing. It is true in business. It is true in parenting. It is true in spiritual life. Anything living becomes distorted when perfection replaces presence. Spiritual life is one of the places where this distortion can become especially subtle. Many people begin with a sincere longing to heal, awaken, soften, and remember who they are. It is beautiful. It is real. And then slowly that longing can get recruited by the old machinery of perfection. Meditation becomes another arena for performance. Presence becomes another standard. Clean eating becomes moral superiority. Boundaries become identity theater. Gratitude becomes emotional bypass. Affirmations become a way to avoid hearing what hurts. Ritual becomes compulsion. Even peace becomes something you feel ashamed for not maintaining. Have you noticed that tendency in yourself at times? The desire not simply to be in practice, but to be good at practice. Not simply to listen inwardly, but to become the kind of person who always knows. Not simply to heal, but to heal quickly, elegantly, and in a way that never inconveniences anyone. Not simply to awaken, but to become visibly evolved. So much suffering enters there. Because spiritual perfectionism can be especially lonely. The person caught in it may look peaceful from the outside while feeling enormous inner strain. They know the language. They can name the concepts. They may even guide others. And privately, they feel ashamed whenever the old pain resurfaces, whenever grief remains, whenever the nervous system flares, whenever they want something ordinary, whenever they are jealous, tired, needy, reactive, confused, or human. Their spirituality becomes less of a shelter and more of another tribunal. If that has ever touched your life, let there be kindness here. The longing underneath it is not wrong. The longing is often for wholeness. But wholeness does not arrive through the banishment of humanity. It arrives through the inclusion of it. Through letting your practice become a place where all of you can come, not only the composed parts. A true practice does not ask you to edit your reality before you enter. It says, bring the fatigue, bring the resentment, bring the longing, Bring the shame, bring the fear, bring the boredom, bring the grief, bring the joy too. Bring the contradiction, bring the unfinishedness, bring the whole weather system of being human. The point is not to appear centered. The point is to return. Return is always a doorway. And some days, returning may look almost embarrassingly simple. Drinking water before coffee because your body is asking for steadiness. Sitting in silence for 3 minutes instead of performing a 40-minute ritual you secretly resent. Stepping outside and feeling your feet on the earth. Telling the truth to a friend instead of disappearing into noble silence. Canceling what you do not have the capacity to hold. Eating enough. Resting before collapse. Stopping the sentence in your own mind when it becomes cruel. These are holy things. They may not glitter, they may not impress, they may not translate into dramatic stories about transformation, but they build the conditions in which transformation becomes trustworthy. Real change often does not happen because of one blazing revelation. It happens because your day, life begins to cooperate with what your deeper self has been trying to say. Cooperation, that is another useful word. Much of inner suffering can be understood as a lack of cooperation between the parts of you. Your mind wants one thing, your body another. Your heart knows one truth, your habits enact another. Your soul is asking for simplification. Your schedule is organized around proving. Your longing seeks quiet. Your nervous system lives inside noise. Alignment is in part the patient creation of cooperation. It is helping the inner and outer life stop contradicting each other so violently. This can happen in your environment too. Look around the spaces you inhabit. Do they support your nervous system or constantly agitate it? Do they reflect who you are now or who you once had to be? Are there corners of your life full of postponed decisions, deferred grief, inherited obligations, visual noise, symbolic weight? Outer spaces matter because they either reinforce self-abandonment or help soften it. A cluttered room does not make you unworthy, but a room that never lets your body settle may be telling a truth about the pace and pressure you have been living under. Perhaps alignment is asking for some practical gentleness here. One cleared surface, one open window, one light turned lower, one shelf relieved of its old emotional load, one object released because it belongs to a former identity. These actions are not merely decorative. They can be deeply communicative to the psyche. They say, I am making space for a life that feels more like mine. Your finances can carry similar messages. Money is not just arithmetic. For many, it holds fear, power, shame, aspiration, memory, inherited belief, and self-worth. Perfection can show up here too as all or nothing thinking. either total control or avoidance, either flawless planning or silent panic, either external success or inner collapse. Alignment offers another possibility. It says, let me meet this honestly. Let me know what is true. Let me choose clarity over image. Let me stop using money as proof that I am winning or failing at life. Let me build a relationship with resource that includes responsibility and self-respect, not only fear. The same is true of the body. So many people try to fix the body without first repairing the relationship. They approach the body as a problem, an obstacle, a source of inconvenience, a project to discipline into acceptability. But the body has been carrying so much for you. It has carried stress you did not know how to process, grief you had no space to feel, tension shaped by old vigilance, hunger you ignored, fatigue you overrode, intuition you mistrusted, pleasure you postponed. To approach the body only with correction, after all that can feel like another betrayal. What if the body needs to be listened to before it is modified? What if the body needs to feel chosen, not managed? What if nourishment matters more than punishment? What if your symptoms, while deserving appropriate care and support, are also asking to be heard for the way they reflect the pace of your life? What if your body is not fighting you, but trying to keep you in conversation with what your mind would rather outrun? Honor what your body and healthcare providers guide you toward, and also notice the emotional atmosphere in which you inhabit your body each day. Do you speak to it as an ally? Do you thank it? Do you notice its wisdom before it has to become louder? Do you let it be a place you live or only a place you evaluate? The body softens under respect, and softened bodies can hear life more clearly. There is a kind of intelligence that only becomes available when the body is not in constant defense. Insight becomes less frantic. Intuition becomes less tangled with fear. Pleasure returns as information. Desire becomes more trustworthy. Rest ceases to feel like a threat. Even prayer changes when the body feels less like an enemy. It becomes less about escape and more about presence. Presence is the hidden treasure beneath so much of this. You have been told, perhaps, that presence is a mystical state to attain. Sometimes it is spoken of as though it belongs only to those who are very disciplined, very evolved, very practiced. But presence can begin in the ordinary. Presence is what happens when your mind and body are allowed to inhabit the same moment without excessive conflict. Presence is what happens when you stop leaving the room of your life every time discomfort enters. Presence is what happens when you stop demanding a different reality before you agree to be with this one. This does not mean passive acceptance of what harms you. It means accurate contact. It means seeing clearly enough that your response can be rooted rather than reactive. It means not confusing avoidance with transcendence. It means letting reality be real long enough for wisdom to emerge. Wisdom is often quieter than fear, but steadier. Fear rushes. Wisdom waits. Fear catastrophizes. Wisdom clarifies. Fear performs. Wisdom roots. Fear needs witnesses. Wisdom needs honesty. Fear asks, how do I secure myself? Wisdom asks, what is true enough to live by now? You have both voices in you. Most people do. The work is not to eradicate fear. The work is to stop letting fear define the whole architecture of your choices. Alignment does not demand fearlessness. It asks for enough trust that fear is no longer the only thing driving the car. That trust can be cultivated in surprisingly human ways. Through sleep, through enough food, through movement that restores rather than punishes, through friendships where you do not have to perform coherence, through time without input, through rituals that soothe rather than evaluate, through saying no before resentment makes the decision for you, through taking yourself seriously when your spirit says, this matters. It may help to remember that alignment is not only about saying no to what is wrong, it is also about saying yes to what is alive. Many people become very skilled at identifying what drains them, but they remain timid about claiming what nourishes them. They fear desire. They mistrust joy. They assume that if so, anything feels too good, too easy, too natural, it cannot be valid. They are more practiced in endurance than in permission. Perhaps you know this pattern. You can tolerate a great deal. You can be responsible in impossible circumstances. You can make things work. But when something genuinely beautiful appears, something aligned, something nourishing, something that lights up the body with quiet steadiness, you hesitate, you question it, you wait for the hidden cost, you prepare for disappointment. This too can be a legacy of living under pressure for too long. But not all good things are traps. Not all ease is avoidance. Not all pleasure is indulgence. Not all resonance is illusion. Sometimes the very thing that feels surprisingly gentle is the thing your life has been waiting for. Sometimes the simple room is holier than the crowded stage. Sometimes the honest relationship is holier than the admired one. Sometimes the smaller, truer opportunity contains more future than the larger, louder one. Sometimes the path that lets your system breathe is the path that allows your gifts to deepen. So let desire become a form of listening, not a cause for suspicion. Not every desire is alignment, of course. Some desires come from old hunger, old fear, old emptiness. But over time, with practice, you begin to feel the difference. Fear-based desire is frantic. It says, get this now or you are nothing. Alignment-based desire is steadier. It says, this matters. This fits. This has life in it. This is worth tending. Tending is slower than grabbing. It is also wiser. A garden is not grown by terror. It is grown by attention, rhythm, season, pruning, nourishment, rest, sun, water, and trust. There are times for planting and times for waiting. Times for cutting back and times for letting things spread, times for protecting what is young, and times for harvesting what is ready. Your life is not so different. If you try to force every area into bloom at once, something becomes brittle. Alignment teaches seasonal attention. What needs nurturing now? What needs less interference? What needs to end? What needs support? What is not ready yet? What has already ripened while you were too busy striving to notice? Have you noticed what has ripened in you? Perhaps your discernment has ripened. Perhaps your intolerance for self-betrayal has ripened. Perhaps your capacity for tenderness has ripened. Perhaps your longing for simplicity has ripened. Perhaps your grief has ripened into clarity. Perhaps your voice is ripening, even if it still trembles. Perhaps your values are becoming more embodied, less decorative. Do not miss the growth that is already here because it did not arrive in the shape perfection expected. Perfection has a very narrow imagination. It imagines growth as linear, visible, efficient, impressive. It imagines healing as constant improvement. It imagines worth as something to be demonstrated publicly. But real growth can look like crying sooner, leaving earlier, saying less, sleeping more, needing simpler things, wanting different relationships, feeling less enchanted by no eyes, becoming less entertaining and more real. Perfection may not know how to celebrate these things. Your soul does. This is why inner work sometimes creates a season of disorientation. The old reward systems stop working before the new ones feel familiar. You may lose interest in things that once motivated you. You may not yet know what replaces them. You may feel strangely quiet. Others may project confusion onto you because you are not moving with your old intensity. Let them. Sometimes a life grows more truthful before it grows more legible. You do not owe instant legibility to anyone. There is dignity in private ripening. There is dignity in changes that take place below the surface. There is dignity in not broadcasting every threshold while you are still crossing it. In fact, some transformations need protection. They are tender when young. They need less commentary, less external interpretation, less exposure to other people's anxiety. This is why alignment often asks for solitude at times. Not isolation born of fear, but solitude as a sacred container. A place where your own inner weather can be felt without so much interference. A place where your values can separate from the noise. A place where your nervous system can relearn what safety feels like when it is not being constantly shaped by demands. If you have been craving solitude lately, it may not mean you are withdrawing from life. It may mean your system is trying to hear itself again. If certain social environments feel louder than they once did, it may not mean you are becoming antisocial. It may mean your instrument is becoming more honest. If ordinary busyness has become harder to tolerate, it may not mean something is wrong. It may mean your soul is no longer willing to drown in what is excessive. Excess can take many forms. Too much noise, too much proving, too much pleasing, too much explaining, too much consumption, too much obligation, too much self-monitoring, too much life organized around the gaze of others. Alignment simplifies. It does not always remove complexity from the outer world, but it decreases unnecessary complexity within you. It reduces the number of internal contradictions you must carry. It helps you stop saying yes when you mean no, stop smiling when you mean hurt, stop chasing when you mean rest, stop performing certainty when you mean confusion. In that way, alignment is profoundly merciful. It reduces the burden of being divided against yourself. And division is exhausting. You know this. If you have ever smiled through a conversation your body wanted to leave. If you have ever accepted praise for a role that was quietly depleting you. If you have ever forced gratitude over grief. If you have ever been admired for the very trait that was costing you your aliveness. Being divided creates a low-grade suffering that can be hard to name because nothing obvious may appear wrong from the outside. Still, the inside knows, the body knows, the breath knows. One of the most healing things you can do is stop arguing with those subtle signals. Not obey them blindly. Repeat them enough to investigate. Why does my chest tighten here? Why do I feel foggy after this person? Why does this commitment flatten me? Why does this dream keep returning? Why am I more tired after performing calm than after telling the truth? Why do I feel relief when I imagine not doing this anymore? Relief can be information, not always an instruction, often an invitation to look more closely. Likewise, resentment can be information. Resentment is often what happens when the inner no has been ignored for too long. It is not always noble, and it is not always accurate, but it often points to a boundary that did not get spoken in a clean and timely way. Many people fear boundaries because they imagine them as harsh. But unspoken boundaries tend to become resentment, and resentment tends to harden what honest boundary could have softened. Alignment favors the earlier truth, the simpler truth, the less theatrical truth. I need rest. I cannot do that. That does not work for me. I need more time. I am not available in that way. I want something different now. I need us to talk honestly. I am not able to keep carrying this. Such sentences can feel enormous when you are used to translating your needs into acceptability. But every time you speak this way, respectfully and clearly, you teach your system that you can remain in relationship without disappearing. Not every relationship will welcome that. That too is information. Alignment will sometimes reveal the places where your old self-abandonment had become part of the contract. And then you must choose, not once forever, again and again. Will I remain loyal to the contract or to my own coherence? That is a sacred question. In parenting, this can be especially profound. Many people want to offer children what they themselves did not receive. They want to bring consciousness, attunement, softness, and repair. And then perfection sneaks in again. They begin trying to parent flawlessly. Every irritation becomes guilt. Every mistake becomes evidence of damage. Every rough day becomes a secret indictment. But children do not need perfect parents. They need present ones, repairing ones, honest ones. Parents who can apologize, regulate with support, tell the truth, and model humanity without collapsing. The same is true in partnership. Intimacy does not flourish because two perfect people found each other. It flourishes because two human beings are willing to stay honest, take responsibility, make repair, and stop using image to avoid reality. A relationship can look admirable from the outside and still be deeply misaligned. Another can look humble and quiet and be full of truth. Which matters more to your soul? Which matters more to your body? There are people whose presence lets your nervous system settle. There are also people whose presence makes you feel as though you are constantly auditioning for emotional safety. One is not always dramatic, and one is not always easy to leave. But your system knows the difference. Alignment asks you to honor that knowledge over time with wisdom, support, and care. Support matters. Let me say that clearly. Choosing alignment does not mean doing everything alone. Many people who have lived in perfection carry a secret isolation. They are used to being competent. They are used to handling things. They are used to being the steady one, the strong one, the wise one. Receiving support can feel exposing, yet alignment may ask you to stop treating independence as the highest virtue. It may ask you to let yourself be helped, mirrored, accompanied, professionally supported, medically supported, spiritually supported, emotionally held. This complements your healing support system. It does not replace it. Being supported does not diminish your strength. It allows truth to go deeper. Sometimes the most aligned sentence is, "I cannot do this alone." Sometimes the most aligned prayer is, "Help me stay honest." Sometimes the most aligned act is letting yourself be seen before you have a polished explanation. And then there is time. Time carries so much pressure for people who live by perfection. There is often a constant sense of lateness, a low-level panic that life is moving and they are behind. Behind in healing, behind in love, behind in success, behind in spiritual maturity, behind in clarity, behind compared with peers, siblings, old versions of themselves, imagined timelines. This sense of being behind can make it very difficult to inhabit the present, because the present becomes only a station on the way to catching up. But what if catching up is not your sacred task? What if being here is? Comparison will almost always tell you that someone is ahead. But ahead in what? In performance, in visibility, in money, in certain milestones, in image. Ahead, according to which metric? Alignment asks a different question. Am I in honest relationship with the life that is mine? Because there are many people who appear ahead and feel inwardly vacant. There are others who look quiet from the outside and are deeply at home in themselves. The outer order tells only part of the story. You may not be behind. You may be ripening according to a rhythm that perfection does not respect. You may be taking longer because you are trying to build something real rather than merely impressive. You may be slower because your body is asking you to heal what earlier generations had to ignore. You may be in a season of invisible rooting, and roots are not glamorous. They are what let a life hold weight without collapse. Do not rush your rooting. Rivers do not apologize for taking the shape the land requires. Trees do not compare their growth every morning. The moon does not shame itself for not being full every night. Nature is full of forms that change in rhythm without panic. Perhaps one reason it soothes us is because something in us remembers that life was never meant to be lived under constant evaluation. Evaluation has its place. Reflection matters. Accountability matters. But constant evaluation corrodes intimacy. If you are always assessing yourself, you are rarely actually with yourself. This is why many people know themselves as a report and not as a relationship. They know how they are doing, but not how they are feeling. They know how they appear, but not what they need. They know their goals, but not their aliveness. They know their progress, but not their peace. Let peace become a metric again, not the only one, a vital one. Peace as in, can I breathe in the life I am living? Peace as in, does my body have room inside this choice? Peace as in, am I able to stay connected to myself here? Peace as in, do I feel divided against myself less often? Peace as in, does this path allow my tenderness to remain alive? These questions may guide you more wisely than many of the standards you inherited. And yes, inherited is the right word, because so much of perfection is inherited. Family systems, cultural systems, social media, institutions, old religions, trauma, capitalism, comparison, school environments, peer dynamics, beauty standards, gender conditioning, and survival experiences all contribute to the internal architecture that says, be more, be better, be easier, be exceptional, be desirable, be composed, be unneedy, be productive, be spiritual, be everything. No wonder the heart gets confused. No wonder rest can feel guilty. No wonder simple truth can feel rebellious. It is rebellious in a way, holy rebellion, not against goodness, but against falseness, not against devotion, but against distortion, not against discipline, but against self-erasure. Alignment is often the quiet rebellion of a soul that refuses to be organized entirely around fear anymore. And that rebellion is beautiful. It may not look dramatic. It may look like deciding not to answer a message tonight. It may look like saying, I need to think about that, instead of instantly accommodating. It may look like choosing one nourishing meal. It may look like telling a therapist, doctor, coach, or trusted friend the truth you usually clean up. It may look like not making a promise while your body is tight. It may look like reducing one form of input that keeps you disconnected from yourself. It may look like reclaiming 1 hour of your day from the machinery of proving. 1 hour can change a life when it is returned to the self. What would you do with an hour that did not belong to performance? Would you sleep? Walk, write, cry, stare at the ceiling, sit in the bath, move slowly in the kitchen, pray. Breathe. Read something that feeds rather than stimulates. Do nothing at all. Notice how quickly perfection may try to make even that hour productive. It will say, use it well, optimize it, transform through it, make it count. And alignment may whisper something far more healing. Let it be yours. Let it be yours. That might be one of the great teachings here. Your morning may be yours, at least for a few minutes. Your body may be yours, not the world's project. Your no may be yours, not a breach of goodness. Your joy may be yours, not something to justify. Your grief may be yours, not something to rush into wisdom for other people's comfort. Your pace may be yours. Your becoming may be yours. When your life starts to become yours again, even in small pockets, something extraordinary happens. The Kron, icy hunger for external confirmation, begins to soften. You still care. You are still relational, but you are less driven by the need to be mirrored perfectly by the outside world because you are no longer so estranged inside. Self-belonging begins to replace some of the frantic search for belonging elsewhere. Self-belonging is not isolation. It is a base, a home frequency, a rootedness that lets relationships become nourishment rather than emergency shelter, a rootedness that lets work become expression rather than identity rescue, a rootedness that lets solitude become replenishing rather than terrifying, a rootedness that lets uncertainty be uncomfortable without making it annihilating. You are allowed to build that kind of rootedness, slowly, tenderly, imperfectly. And every time perfection appears again, as it likely will, you can meet it differently. You can say, "Thank you for trying to protect me. I know you learned that control meant safety. I know you are afraid, and I am learning another way. A way that includes standards, but not violence. A way that includes care, but not contempt. A way that includes commitment, but not self-erasure. A way that includes growth, but not war." Imagine how deeply healing that can be for the parts of you that have lived so long under pressure. Imagine what happens when your inner world no longer feels like a place where one mistake triggers condemnation. Imagine what creativity, intimacy, devotion, and steadiness become possible in that kinder atmosphere. Atmosphere matters more than we sometimes realize. A seed can carry all the potential in the world, but if the atmosphere is wrong, growth is stunted. A heart can carry enormous wisdom, but if the atmosphere is constant judgment, that wisdom may stay hidden behind defense. Create a kinder atmosphere within, and more of your true life can emerge, not instantly, organically. Perhaps this is why gentleness is not optional fluff on the path. It is structural. It changes what can grow. This does not mean permitting harm. It does not mean never challenging yourself. It does not mean remaining in comfort at all costs. It means the challenge comes from love, not from disgust. It means the standard comes from integrity, not from comparison. It means the movement comes from truth, not from panic. It means the stretch is accompanied by enough safety that the self does not have to fracture in order to comply. Stretch without fracture. What a beautiful aim. So many people know how to stretch until they break. Fewer know how to stretch while staying in relationship with themselves. That requires pacing, rest, support, discernment, and the humility to stop when the cost becomes too high. It requires freedom from the fantasy that suffering is proof of virtue. Sometimes suffering is simply information that something is out of rhythm. Listen sooner, and suffering often changes shape. Not always completely. Life includes pain. Loss is real. Illness is real. Injustice is real. Grief is real. We do not use spiritual language to deny this, but there is unnecessary suffering that comes from fighting what is true, from demanding perfection before love, from abandoning the body, from refusing support, from living to be seen rather than to be whole. Alignment cannot erase all pain. It can reduce the pain of inner betrayal. That is no small mercy. When inner betrayal decreases, clarity often increases. You may still not know every answer, but you begin to know where not to keep lying. And that matters, because clarity is not always the full map. Sometimes it is simply the inability to continue pretending. If you can no longer pretend in certain areas of your life, that may be a grace, a hard grace perhaps, a disruptive grace, a grace that rearranges rather than comforts. Still grace, because pretending is expensive. It takes life force to keep translating dissonance into normal. It takes life force to maintain identities that no longer fit. It takes life force to smile through depletion, to override intuition, to carry relationships that depend on your silence, to keep calendars that contradict your values, to keep goals that belong to an older self. Alignment returns that life force little by little by ending some of the internal lies. Not all at once. Enough at a time for the system to adjust. This is why patience remains essential. You may see truth before you can fully live it. That is common. Sometimes the body, finances, family structures, responsibilities, or nervous system need time to catch up. Do not use that reality to shame yourself. Let honesty be honest. Some truths can be enacted quickly. Others require support, planning, mourning, or preparation. Alignment is not impulsivity. It is fidelity to truth with wise timing. Wise timing is a form of love. Rushing can be another disguise for fear. Delaying forever can be another disguise for fear. Wise timing asks, what is the next faithful movement here? It does not ask for theatrical certainty. It asks for sincerity and discernment. What can I honor now? What can I prepare for? what needs support before change, what deserves more grieving, what wants one small beginning. One small beginning can open astonishing doors. A single conversation, a single canceled obligation, a single protected morning, a single request for support, a single act of eating with presence, a single journal page where you stop performing positivity, a single hour without the phone, a single walk where you let yourself admit what you want, a single boundary, a single apology to yourself, a single yes to what you have been postponing. Do not underestimate the sacredness of beginnings that fit your actual capacity. Perfection loves grand declarations because they create the feeling of control. Alignment loves sincere beginnings because they create actual trust. Trust is built through evidence, and evidence is built through repetition. So let the repetitions become kind. Not the old repetition of criticism, pressure, comparison, and rushing. New repetition, checking in, pausing, breathing, asking what is true, speaking more simply, honoring the body sooner, returning after drift, repairing after rupture, celebrating congruence, and when it is invisible to others. These repetitions become a new inner climate. Over time, they can change what feels normal. Where once it felt normal to override yourself, it may begin to feel normal to pause. Where once it felt normal to say yes automatically, it may begin to feel normal to check inwardly first. Where once it felt normal to measure your day by output, it may begin to feel normal to ask whether you remained in relationship with yourself. That shift is profound. Do not miss it because it is quiet. Quiet changes are often the most stable. A loud breakthrough can inspire. A quiet reorientation can sustain. There is room for both. But many lives are transformed not by one unforgettable peak, but by thousands of moments where the old pattern could have run the whole show and did not. Thousands of moments of soft interruption. Thousands of moments of saying, "No, I will not speak to myself that way now. No, I will not commit from guilt now. No, I will not abandon my body for applause now. No, I will not call this alignment if my whole system is shrinking." That is power. Not flashy power. Integrated power. Integrated power does not need to dominate. It knows itself. It can wait. It can listen. It can say yes with the whole body. It can say no without hatred. It can receive correction without annihilation. It can change course without identity collapse. It can stay soft without becoming porous to everything. It can love deeply without offering itself up for consumption. You are allowed to become that kind of powerful. And perhaps you already are, in ways you have not fully honored. Perhaps your fatigue itself has been a form of wisdom, refusing to keep financing what no longer aligns. Perhaps your tears have been power, dissolving old hardness. Perhaps your longing has been power, drawing you toward a truer configuration of life. Perhaps your inability to keep pretending has been power, even if it has looked messy from the outside. Messy does not mean wrong. Messy often means alive. Messy often means the old arrangement is no longer able to hide the truth. So when mess arrives, ask a different question. Not, how do I make this look perfect? Ask, what is this revealing? What loyalty is being challenged? What part of me is asking to be included? What truth is surfacing? What pace would help me stay present? What support is needed? What image is dying here? What simplification wants to happen? Simplification is a mercy in a time when so many are overcomplicating their lives in order to feel secure. You may not need more strategies as much as more honesty. You may not need a more impressive routine as much as a more inhabitable day. You may not need a bigger vision board as much as a smaller amount of self-betrayal. You may not need to become better at holding everything as much as better at recognizing what no longer belongs in your hands. Some burdens are not yours because they never were. Others are no longer yours because the season has changed. A great deal of suffering comes from carrying both. Let your life become more selective. Selective with your attention. Selective with your promises. Selective with what enters your nervous system. Selective with what stories get to keep living in your mind. Selective with the rooms, rhythms, and relationships that shape your days. Selection is not cruelty. It is stewardship. You are a steward of your life force, a steward of your attention, a steward of the quality of your days, a steward of what gets repeated in your inner world, a steward of the body that carries you, a steward of the voice that speaks through you, a steward of the gifts that require conditions in which to flourish. Stewardship and perfection are not the same. Perfection squeezes. Stewardship tends. Perfection judges. Stewardship cares. Perfection fears decay. Stewardship understands cycles. Perfection seeks image. Stewardship seeks integrity. Which one would you rather let shape the rest of your life? Not because one day you will never hear the old pressure again, but because you can choose the climate in which that pressure is met. You can choose whether the old voice gets to be law or merely history. You can choose whether your tenderness gets treated as weakness or wisdom. You can choose whether your life becomes a monument to control or a vessel for truth. And truth, even when it costs, carries blessing. Not always in the form the ego wanted. Not always on the timeline fear demanded, but blessing nonetheless. The blessing of less inner division. The blessing of deeper rest. The blessing of clearer desire. The blessing of cleaner relationships. The blessing of a body that no longer has to scream to be heard. The blessing of work that feels more honest. The blessing of peace that comes from not constantly performing. The blessing of becoming trustworthy to yourself. Trustworthy to yourself. That may be one of the most beautiful forms of success. not infallible, trustworthy. The kind of person who listens sooner, who repairs, who tells the truth, who does not make perfection the price of love, who does not demand that every choice be certain before it can be sincere, who can remain kind while learning, who can remain honest while changing, who can remain devoted without turning devotion into war. If this resonates, let it settle not as another ideal, but as a possibility. You do not need to accomplish alignment like a trophy. You get to practice it like a homecoming, again and again, in kitchens and conversations, in calendars and boundaries, in mornings and endings, in the body and in the breath, in work and in love, in grief and in joy, in the ordinary where real lives are actually lived. The ordinary matters so much. Many people miss their lives because they are waiting for the extraordinary to confirm their worth. But a life is made in the ordinary, in how you wake, in what tone meets you in the mirror, in whether breakfast is hurried punishment or quiet care, in whether your schedule leaves room for your own humanity, in whether your relationships can hold truth, in whether your evenings end with collapse or with some measure of ready earn. Maybe this is where the sacred really lives. Not only in peak moments, in repeated ordinary alignment, a soft blanket chosen because comfort matters, a light turned low because your nervous system needs gentleness, a hard truth spoken before it ferments, a phone set down before sleep, a body fed, a boundary kept, a laugh aloud, a tear not explained away, a prayer offered in plain language, a small beauty noticed, a day shaped not by what looks most impressive, but by what feels most true. This is how love becomes practical. This is how spirituality becomes embodied. This is how healing becomes lived rather than discussed. This is how perfection loses its throne. Not because you defeated it once, because you stopped kneeling. And what rises in you when you stop kneeling to perfection may surprise you. There may be more tenderness than you expected, more grief, more relief, more anger at what pressure cost you, more simplicity, more appetite for beauty, more boundaries, more honesty, more need for quiet, more willingness to be misunderstood, more reverence for your own life, more respect for how much energy it takes to remain divided, more devotion to no longer living that way. Let all of that be part of the unfolding. You are not required to package your becoming neatly. You are not required to explain every inward shift in language others approve of. You are not required to become palatable in order to be aligned. Sometimes the truest thing about a season is that it is not yet ready to be translated. Sometimes you are simply learning a new intimacy with yourself, and that learning deserves privacy. Privacy can be medicine for those who have lived too much in performance. It creates a place where change is not immediately recruited into identity, a place where insight can remain soft enough to become embodied. a place where your relationship with yourself matters more than the story about yourself. Consider what in your life needs a little more privacy right now. Not secrecy born of shame, privacy born of protection. The difference matters. Protection is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a hand cupped around a small flame. There may be a small flame in you now, a clearer desire, a truer no, a quieter pace, a more embodied value. A sense that enough of your life must begin cooperating with your soul that you can no longer keep pretending otherwise. Protect that flame. Feed it. Do not hand it immediately to every voice that still worships urgency or image. Let it grow in its own time. As it grows, you may find yourself forgiving yourself in new ways, not excusing harm, not rewriting reality, forgiving. Seeing the younger selves who used perfection as a shield, understanding why pressure felt necessary, releasing shame for what was, in many moments, an intelligent attempt to survive. Forgiveness creates room. Room is where new choices can breathe, and new choices matter more than old shame. Always. Shame says, look what you were. Alignment says, look what is possible now. Shame says, you should have known. Alignment says, you know more now. Shame says, punish yourself into purity. Alignment says, love yourself into coherence. Love yourself into coherence. There is a whole life inside that sentence. It does not mean waiting passively for everything to feel easy. It means letting love become the method of challenge, the method of truth, the method of repair, the method of discipline, the method of practice, the method of return. What changes when love is the method? Usually everything. The breath changes. The body responds differently. The timeline softens. The nervous system opens enough to learn. The heart becomes less defended. The choices become cleaner. The standards become more humane. The path becomes more sustainable. Sustainability matters because many people can change briefly under pressure. Fewer can build a life that remains kind enough to inhabit. Let yours become inhabitable. Not only admirable, inhabitable. A life where your values are not abstract. A life where your body is not constantly paying for your ambition. A life where your relationships do not depend on your self-erasure. A life where your spirituality does not require disowning your complexity. A life where your work reflects your gifts without devouring your soul. A life where your pace lets your heart remain in the room. That kind of life is not built by perfection. It is built by alignment. And alignment begins wherever you are willing to stop lying to yourself lovingly. Lovingly. Do not leave that word behind. The stop is not a slap. It is a turning toward, a hand on the chest, a breath, a recognition. Oh, this is not true for me anymore. Oh, I have been carrying too much. Oh, I have been trying to earn what was never withheld. I am tired of negotiating with my own worth. Oh, I want a life that lets me stay inside myself. That wanting is sacred. Honor it. Honor it by making one small place in your day where truth has more authority than performance. Maybe it is the first 5 minutes after you wake, before the world begins telling you who to be. Maybe it is the way you speak to yourself when a plan changes. Maybe it is the moment before you answer a request. Maybe it is the decision to stop turning every feeling into a flaw. These places are thresholds. They look ordinary, but they are where a self is either abandoned or welcomed home. And when you welcome yourself home, you may discover that nothing essential was ever asking for your perfection. Life was asking for your participation. Love was asking for your presence. Your body was asking for your listening. Your gifts were asking for your trust. Your future was asking for your honesty. Not the polished honesty that sounds wise. The living honesty that trembles and still tells the truth. So let this be simple now. Put down what was never yours to carry. Keep what is real. Release what is only image. Rest where you can. Speak where you must. Wait when waiting is wise. Move when movement feels clean. Begin without demanding brilliance. Pause without calling it failure. Receive support with ease, without calling it weakness. Let your softness be intelligent. Let your clarity be kind. Let your life become something you can actually inhabit, not merely something you can explain. This is how the soul exhales. This is how pressure loosens. This is how the heart begins to trust the path beneath it. And as trust deepens, you may walk more quietly, yet more truly, through your days, no longer trying to be extraordinary for the world, but willing at last to be fully present for your own sacred, beautifully ordinary life. You may not know the entire shape of your next chapter, but perhaps you can know what is resonant today. Perhaps you can know which room feels kind, which conversation feels real, which commitment feels clean, which pace feels breathable, which thought feels old, which desire keeps returning because it belongs to your life, which behavior leaves you with self-respect, which choice lets you remain in your own body. That is alignment, not a final destination, a fidelity to what is true enough to live from here. As you move forward, something may begin to shift in ways you cannot predict yet. You may find that what once captivated you now feels noisy. You may feel drawn to simpler rhythms. You may stop admiring certain forms of success that require too much self-abandonment. You may notice yourself pausing longer before saying yes. You may become less available to perform and more available to feel. This can make your life look different, not worse, different, more inhabitable, more whole. And yes, there may be grief in that too. Grief for the years you spent trying so hard. Grief for the body that carried all that pressure. Grief for the self you abandoned in order to be loved. Grief for the time lost to proving. Grief for the tenderness that had to hide. Grief for how rarely anyone taught you that alignment mattered more than appearance. Please let that grief be holy if it comes. Grief is not a detour from alignment. It is often part of the return. It clears what false effort could not. It softens what control kept rigid. It washes through the places that were never meant to remain armored forever. Like rain soaking dry earth, grief can prepare the ground for new honesty. Do not rush it. Do not weaponize spiritual language against it. Do not demand that it become wisdom before it has finished being sorrow. Sorrow has its own intelligence. And after sorrow, or even beside it, there may come a quieter joy. Not the forced positivity that denies difficulty. A steadier joy. The joy of not being at war with yourself all day. The joy of moving through a morning without a soundtrack of criticism. The joy of honoring one need without apology. The joy of taking one true step and feeling your whole system agree. The joy of discovering that peace was never as far away as perfection told you it was. Peace was waiting in alignment. Peace was waiting in honesty. Peace was waiting in the body. Peace was waiting in the parts of you that have been asking all along to be treated like someone worth listening to. You are worth listening to. Not because you are always right, because you are alive. And aliveness matters. Aliveness is not neat. It is responsive. It changes. It pulses. It notices. It retreats and returns. It blooms and sheds. It carries contradiction and still remains whole. That is why trying to perfect a life can feel so deadening. Life is not meant to be arranged into a static proof of your adequacy. Life is meant to be lived in relationship, in season, in breath, in movement, in truth. So perhaps the sacred task is not to become unmessy. Perhaps it is to remain loving while messy, to remain honest while uncertain, to remain available to truth while the form of your life evolves, to remain devoted while no longer using devotion as a disguise for control. This is what inner maturity often looks like, though it may not be celebrated loudly. It looks like speaking with less performance. It looks like honoring the body sooner. It looks like knowing when enough is enough. It looks like not making every discomfort your fault. It looks like being able to disappoint an expectation without collapsing. It looks like taking responsibility without losing tenderness. It looks like changing your mind when new truth arrives. It looks like moving at the pace your integrity can actually sustain. Integrity has a pace. That matters. When you move faster than your integrity can sustain, fragmentation follows. You may gain momentum outwardly, but something inside gets left behind. A life built that way can look impressive while feeling internally expensive. Alignment invites you to let your pace match your truth, to let your decisions have enough space for embodiment, to let your yeses be rooted, not rushed, to let your no be clear before resentment has to do the talking for you. What would happen if you trusted that a slower true step can carry more life than a faster false one? What would happen if you stopped using other people's urgency as evidence of your own delay? What would happen if you stopped confusing acceleration with alignment? What would happen if you let steadiness become beautiful again? What would happen if enough was allowed to be enough? Enough. Another powerful word. Enough rest to hear yourself. Enough honesty to stop the inner splitting. Enough courage for one conversation. Enough slowness to notice what is real. Enough compassion to keep the heart open. Enough devotion to return after drifting. Enough alignment for this moment. You do not need to solve the whole forest. You need enough light for the next few steps. And often, when those steps are aligned, more light appears. This has always been one of the tender mysteries of the path. Clarity so often follows honesty rather than preceding it. People wait to feel certain before they act. But sometimes certainty grows only after one truthful movement has been made. You say the thing, you leave the thing, you begin the thing, you rest from the thing. And in that act of coherence, fog lifts. Not all at once. Enough. Enough is a friend of alignment. Perfection does not understand enough. Perfection only understands more. More effort, more polish, more certainty, more control, more validation, more proof. But souls do not thrive on endless more. They thrive on rightness of fit, on congruence, on the feeling of being in one's own life rather than forever auditioning for it. Are you living in your life or auditioning for it? That question may stay with you, because many people have become very skilled at performing versions of themselves that are easy to praise. The capable one, the healed one, the calm one, the giving one, the spiritual one, the endlessly resilient one, the one who can metabolize pain beautifully and quickly, the one who never needs too much. And beneath those performances may live a much more human self, one who is tired, longing, uncertain, creative, grieving, sensual, hungry for simplicity, hungry for truth, hungry to stop being managed. That self is not your liability. That self is your doorway. When you stop exiling that self, life deepens. Food tastes fuller. Rest becomes restorative. Conversations become real. Work becomes more intentional. Creativity returns. Desire clarifies. The body softens. Time feels less like an adversary. You begin to feel less like a role and more like a person. That is no small miracle. And it happens through many small choices that the world may never applaud. The world may not celebrate the day you decide to stop over-explaining. It may not notice when you choose tenderness over pressure. It may not understand why you turned down what looked impressive. It may not congratulate you for the boundary that saved your nervous system or the rest that restored your kindness. But your body will know. Your heart will know. Your life will know. Sometimes the deepest victories are felt privately first. Later, they become visible in the way you move, in the way your eyes settle, in the way your voice stops asking permission to exist, in the way you become less reactive to pressure that once controlled you, in the way your joy becomes less performative and more rooted, in the way you stop needing everyone to agree before you honor what is true. When you look back on this moment months from now, you may recognize it as a turning point, not because everything changed at once, but because something essential did. Perhaps this is where you stopped calling self-abandonment maturity. Perhaps this is where you stopped treating perfection as the price of peace. Perhaps this is where you began, more sincerely than ever before, to let alignment lead. If that is happening, let it be enough. If the shift is tiny, let it be enough. If all you can do today is notice, let that be enough. If all you can do is soften your inner tone by 1 degree, let that be enough. If all you can do is tell one small truth, let that be enough. Enough does not mean final. It means faithful to the moment. And faithfulness to the moment is how lives are rebuilt with dignity. Not through dramatic vows made in self-contempt, through sustained sincerity, not through punishment disguised as discipline, through devotion rooted in care, not through endless comparison, through returning to what resonates as true, not through becoming impossible to criticize, through becoming unwilling to betray yourself for approval. Your sensitivity is a gift. Your honesty is a path. Your body is an ally. Your peace is not a reward for perfection. Your life is not a test you must pass. Read that with your heart. Your life is not a test you must pass. What if it is a relationship you are here to live? A relationship with time, with body, with love, with truth, with grief, with joy, with purpose, with mystery. Relationships cannot be mastered in the way machines can be mastered. They ask for presence, attention, listening, repair, rhythm, mutuality. A relationship-based life is not flawless. It is alive. Alive enough to change. Alive enough to outgrow old identities. Alive enough to rest. Alive enough to want more. Alive enough to tell the truth when the old script no longer works. Alive enough to let love in. Alive enough to start again. Start again. There is such gentleness in that phrase when it is spoken without shame. Not start over because you ruined everything. Start again because life is cyclical. Start again because mornings keep coming. Start again because return is holy. Start again because every moment offers a small threshold back to coherence. Start again because being human means forgetting sometimes. Start again because perfection is not the point. The point is presence. The point is alignment. The point is the increasing refusal to leave yourself behind. So perhaps, before this day ends, you might place a hand somewhere on your body and ask one sincere question. Not the big question that overwhelms, not what should I do with my entire life. Something smaller, something your system can actually receive. What feels true right now? What do I need in this moment? What am I pretending not to know? Where am I bracing? What would feel clean today? Where have I been too hard on myself? What would alignment look like for the next hour? Then listen without rushing the answer. The answer may be very quiet. It may be rest. It may be water. It may be a boundary. It may be a postponed task. It may be one conversation. It may be a walk. It may be a cry. It may be a beginning. It may be saying not today to what depletes you. It may be saying yes, finally, to what your heart has been carrying. Whatever comes, meet it with respect. Respect changes everything. Respect slows the hand before it strikes inwardly. Respect notices when the body has had enough. Respect does not demand that intuition be impressive before it is honored. Respect does not mock tenderness. Respect does not confuse self-violation with strength. Respect says, I may still be learning, but I will not treat myself carelessly. That alone can become a revolution inside a life. And revolutions of the soul often begin quietly, not with spectacle, with a decision. A decision to stop making war your default method of growth. A decision to stop calling pressure virtue when it is hollowing you out. A decision to let your values become embodied rather than advertised. A decision to let your heart matter again. A decision to trust that what is true does not need perfection in order to be followed. You do not need perfection. You need alignment. You need the kind of inner honesty that lets the body breathe. You need the kind of self-respect that tells the truth sooner. You need the kind of compassion that does not collapse under imperfection. You need the kind of devotion that returns without drama. You need the kind of love that can remain present while you are still becoming. That love can be yours. Not because you finally deserve it, because it has always been the medicine. And maybe, very quietly, you already feel that. Maybe something in you is recognizing the difference between pressure and peace, between image and integrity, between effort that drains and effort that nourishes. Maybe something in you is remembering how good it feels to be simple, to be honest, to be with yourself without turning the moment into another assignment. If so, trust that. not blindly, tenderly. Stay close to it. Protect it from the noise that wants to turn it back into performance. Let it instruct the next choice and the next one after that. You do not need to become another person. You need to stop abandoning the one who is here. And the one who is here right now may be more ready than you think. Ready not to have everything figured out, but ready to listen. Ready not to be flawless, but ready to be sincere. Ready not to control every outcome, but ready to honor what is true. Ready not to impress the world, but ready to inhabit your life. That readiness is enough. So breathe for a moment and let your body hear this all the way through. Nothing is wrong with you because you are unfinished. Nothing is wrong with you because you are tender. Nothing is wrong with you because you need rest, clarity, support, space, time, honesty, slowness, less noise, more truth. Nothing is wrong with you because you can no longer tolerate what once kept you numb. That may simply mean your life is asking to be lived more faithfully now. And faithfulness can begin here, in this breath, in this body, in this choice to soften rather than attack, in this willingness to trust resonance more than image, in this permission to let enough be enough, in this sacred, ordinary return to yourself. You do not need perfection, just alignment. And perhaps all along, alignment has been another name for love.